Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something kind of unsettling, a neurological condition that's been affecting gibbons in North American zoos. Yeah. And our main source is really fascinating, a 2024 veterinary pathology study that really dives deep into this condition called gibbon infarctive encephalopathy.
Wow.
Yeah. So are you ready to kind of explore this condition, understand why it's happening and what it means for gibbons?
Absolutely. I think it's a very fascinating topic, and I'm curious to see what the study found.
Yeah, well, this study kind of paints a concerning picture.
Yeah.
Reveals that since 1997, 32 gibbons across 17 different North American zoos have shown some sort of neurological impairment.
17 different zoos.
Yeah, and it's not just limited to one species.
Oh, wow.
White-cheeked, agile, Javanese, and buff-cheeked gibbons are all affected.
So it's widespread.
Yeah, and what's even more alarming is, how these neurological issues really impact their ability to perform their natural behaviors.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine, these creatures that are renowned for their agility, struggling to swing through their habitats, groom themselves, or even eat.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And often it leads to euthanasia.
That's a terrible decline.
The study actually coined the term gibbon infarctive encephalopathy, or GIE, to describe this condition.
Oh.
And it really delves into the findings from brain tissue analysis from 15 deceased gibbons representing 4 different species, all of whom showed these neurological symptoms.
So they were able to look at the brains themselves.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Gross examination of the brain tissue didn't reveal any obvious lesions.
Interesting.
But when they looked under the microscope, they found a different story.
Okay.
Researchers discovered infarctive lesions, which are basically areas of dead tissue caused by a lack of blood supply. In a staggering 93% of the gibbons' cerebrocortical gray and white matter.
Oh.
And they were also present in 67% of the cerebellar gray and white matter.
Cerebellar as well. That's
Yeah. So microscopically, there's clear evidence of damage. But what does this damage actually look like?
Right. So these lesions were characterized by something called parenchymal loss, which basically means the loss of functional brain tissue. There was also an accumulation of foamy macrophages, cells responsible for cleaning up debris, and gymnostocytes.
Gymnostocytes. Now, those sound interesting. Could you elaborate on those a bit?
Yeah, so gymnostocytes are a type of glial cell that gets activated in response to injury in the central nervous system. So think of them as first responders rushing to the scene of an accident to help with repairs. Their presence in these lesions suggests that the brain was trying to heal, but unfortunately the damage was often too extensive.
That makes sense. Now, the study also mentions these unique vascular changes observed in the blood vessels within these lesions.
Right. So these changes included things like thickened blood vessel walls, tortuosity, and multifocal medial vacuolation, essentially abnormalities in the structure of the vessels themselves. This points to a problem with the blood supply to these brain regions, which likely contributed to the tissue deaths.
Right. So it's a complex puzzle. But did they actually manage to pinpoint a specific cause for this vascular disruption and the tissue damage?
So they meticulously ruled out several possibilities, including large artery atherosclerosis, cardioembolism, and specific infections like Baylisascaris.
Wow.
And their analysis suggests that small vessel disease, or SVD, similar to a condition seen in humans, is the most likely culprit.
So a human condition is potentially mirroring itself in gibbons.
Potentially, yes.
That's fascinating, but also concerning. I'm curious to learn more about this SVD and its implications.
Absolutely. So we left off talking about SVD.
Right. You mentioned different subtypes of SVD in humans. Could those help explain what's going on in gibbons?
Yeah, absolutely. In humans, we see 3 main clinical subtypes.
Okay.
Sporadic arteriosclerosis.
Okay.
Sporadic or hereditary cerebral amyloid angiopathy. And inherited or genetic subtypes that don't involve amyloid.
So which of these are we potentially looking at in gibbons?
Well, based on the study's findings, amyloid angiopathy seems less likely.
No.
Special staining techniques didn't show any amyloid deposits in the gibbon brain tissue. And purely genetic factors also seem improbable just because this condition is appearing across multiple gibbon species.
Right.
So
that leaves us with sporadic arteriosclerosis.
Precisely.
And this subtype is often linked to aging and vascular risk factors, which just adds another layer to this puzzle.
Yeah. Definitely.
The study highlights the need for thorough diagnostic workups in gibbons that show these neurological signs.
Right.
What does that entail?
So we're talking about a comprehensive approach.
Okay.
including electrocardiograms, echocardiograms,
Oh, wow.
blood tests, Baylisascaris, antibody testing, and MRIs. Gathering all this information can help us understand the individual gibbon's health status
Right.
and look for any underlying factors that could be contributing to this GIE.
That sounds very similar to the process for humans suspected of neurological conditions.
It is very similar.
And speaking of similarities, the study brings up a fascinating connection between diet and vascular health.
Yes.
There's a lot of variation in the diets of captive gibbons.
Right.
And this could be impacting their susceptibility to GA.
Yeah, definitely.
So certain diets could be putting some gibbons at higher risk.
Potentially.
What kind of dietary factors are we talking about here?
Well, the study doesn't pinpoint specific dietary culprits, but it does note the lack of reported GIE cases in siamangs,
Okay.
a species with a more folivorous diet.
Interesting.
So it raises the question of whether a diet higher in foliage might offer some protection against GI.
That's a compelling observation. It makes you wonder if dietary adjustments could play a role in preventing or managing GA in other gibbon species.
That's the real question, isn't it?
Right.
More research is needed to explore this, but it's definitely something worth investigating. The study also mentions potential treatments that have shown promise in other primate species with similar neurological challenges.
Okay, what kind of treatments are we talking about?
Things like anticoagulant therapy, anti-inflammatory medication, and blood pressure management strategies.
Tell me more about how those might help.
Sure. So anticoagulants or blood thinners, they help prevent blood clots from forming.
Okay.
So this could be beneficial if there are concerns about blockages in those small vessels we talked about.
Right, but wouldn't there be risks associated with blood thinners, especially for animals that are as active as gibbons?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Any treatment comes with potential risks.
Right.
And those would need to be carefully weighed against the potential benefits.
What about anti-inflammatory medication? How would that play a role?
Well, anti-inflammatories can help reduce the inflammation surrounding those infarcts,
Okay.
potentially protecting surviving brain tissue and improving neurological function.
So it's about calming things down and minimizing further damage.
Exactly. And then finally we have blood pressure management.
Right.
High blood pressure can stress blood vessels, making them more susceptible to damage. So managing blood pressure could be crucial in preventing further neurological decline.
So it sounds like a multifaceted approach is needed, addressing both the potential causes and the damage.
Yeah, it's all about understanding this interplay of factors that contribute to this condition
Right.
and finding ways to interrupt that cycle.
Okay.
But there's another element we need to discuss.
Okay, I'm hooked. What is it?
So we've been comparing GI in gibbons to similar conditions in humans, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, there's a specific aspect of sporadic arteriosclerosis in humans that could be playing a big role in these gibbons.
Okay.
The blood-brain barrier.
So we're back, and you mentioned the blood-brain barrier.
Right. The blood-brain barrier, it's a highly selective membrane that controls what can pass from the blood into the brain.
So like a gatekeeper.
Exactly. It protects the brain from harmful stuff and makes sure things are stable for the brain cells to work properly.
So how does this relate to GIE?
Well, in humans with sporadic arteriosclerosis, the blood-brain barrier is often compromised.
Okay.
This disruption can lead to inflammation fluid buildup, even toxic substances getting into the brain, all of which can damage brain tissue.
So a leaky blood-brain barrier could be the link between the blood vessel changes and the neurological symptoms.
That's the idea. And if this is true, it could mean new treatments.
How could you even study the blood-brain barrier in gibbons?
It's a challenge for sure, but there are some advanced imaging techniques like specialized MRI protocols that can help see and assess the blood-brain barrier in living animals.
So we might be able to actually see if it's leaking.
Exactly. And if we confirm that the blood-brain barrier is involved, it could lead to new therapies that focus on repairing or strengthening that barrier.
That's incredible.
Sure.
We've gone from these symptoms to microscopic lesions, unusual blood vessel changes, and now the blood-brain barrier. It's amazing how everything's connected.
It really is. It shows how complex this condition is and why we need more research to really understand it and develop effective treatments.
It's also remarkable to think that by studying this in gibbons, we might learn something about similar conditions in humans.
That's the amazing thing about comparative medicine. What we learn from one species can help us understand others.
What are your thoughts, dear listener? What surprised you?
Keep those minds-inspired hearts light and tails wagging from Vet NeuroJar.